Chapter 31. The Real Reno. Moving up into Rufus' room, Reno didn't get a chance to even look around as he was shoved up against the wall, a hot hard body pressing in against his own, needy mouth claiming his inner fiery kiss. Moaning deeply, the red-headed Turk wrapped his arms around his ex-boss, fingers twisting up into the fine blonde hair. Rufus was known to be aggressive with his partners. Yes, Reno knew he wasn't the only one for most their days of Shinra. It wasn't until the geostigma hit that Rufus had dropped the other lovers and focused his attention on Reno. Panting hard, aquamarine eyes stared down into hard sapphire, a faint glow showing the mucker was coursing through Rufus' body. It always did when he was aroused. "I thought you said you wanted to talk, you." Rufus actually growled at him, his hands fisting into Reno's shirt. "We are. After I fuck your brains out. I love it when you lie to people." "Rufus. I wasn't lying." Rufus blinked slowly, the lust dying from his eyes. "You weren't lying?" Reno shook his head, his eyes losing a little bit of their color. Slowly Rufus stepped back, his sapphire eyes looking over the man he had claimed as his own. He knew so little about him. He had always assumed his real name was Reno, as that is what all his files said his name was, that he was born in the slums of Midja to a honeybee prostitute turned drug addict and an unknown father. "Renton Sinclair. That is your real name?" Reno nodded, moving away to sit on the large four-poster bed that was Rufus Renton Daniel Sinclair. "Actually, none of us use our real names, even on official paperwork." Reno had once more completely dropped the slum rat accent. Slowly Rufus moved over to the bed as well, but did not sit, choosing instead to lean up against one of the posters. "Do you know everyone's real name then?" He didn't like secrets being kept from him, even among his Turks. "Just Trude and Tseng ''S. And only by accident." Seeing the look his boss was giving him, he prayed silently to whatever deity was out there that Trude and Tseng didn't string him up by his nutsack. "Rude is Isaiah Raphael Davis. Tseng is Kyotseng Akira." He dropped his first name and goes by his middle name. "I don't think even Cloud knows that you. It's protection, you. No one knows our real name. They can't go after our families." It made sense, as they found out the hard way that people held great hatred for his Turks, even going so far as to hunt them down. It wouldn't surprise him if they went after the families in retribution, but that still didn't sit well with him, that after all these years he didn't even know the real name of his lover and the man that practically raised him. Looks like once Kyo got back from the States he would be having a nice long chat with him as well. "So that story about your parents?" Reno shrugged, leaning back against the pillows at the head of the bed, altered slightly for purer blood's understanding. Sighing, seeing he wasn't going to get out of this, he sat up, laying his hands on his crossed legs in front of him. "I'm actually from a small village on the northern tip of my deal on the second island. A small fishing village on the coast. My father worked at the plant there, but he did craft violins as a hobby. My grandparents were well off being landowners, just like Rhapsodo's family. So yes." He chuckled, flashing Rufus a charming smile. "I was raised to be well-bred. My dad wanted to make it on his own, though we always had Grandpa's support if we needed. As I told your parents, my mother did have an addictive personality. She got introduced to Maco-laced drugs when I was 3. By age 5 my grandparents were supporting me, and Dad and Mom left for Midja where the supply was cheaper and more plentiful. My dad died of a sudden heart attack when I was 8, and because of that stupid Midja law, because my mother was still alive and never officially divorced, guess where I ended up? In the slums." Reno nodded and shrugged. He had come to terms with the hand he had been dealt. So this whole slum rat persona? Rufus was starting to feel like he didn't even know his lover anymore. "An actu. I became what people expected me to be, when I'm home alone. I dropped the act." Moving over to Reno, Rufus sat down in front of him, those blue eyes piercing through what felt like the back of Reno's skull. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" It was a low growl. The one thing Rufus required of all his Turks was honesty. And this was a blow to him. "Because that wasn't the me you were attracted to. You said you always liked my slum rat persona, so I just kept it you. Standing up, Rufus began to pace the room. He honestly didn't know what to think right now. Turning back, he leveled Reno was a hard look. Is there anything I know about you that is the truth? Course you. Come on, Rufus. I don't lie to you. If you had asked about where I was from, I would have told you. All our files are doctored at Shinra. They have to be in case we piss someone off. Stopping in his pacing, Rufus thought back to the many files he had read through about his Turks. He knew something was up when he was younger, when he was reading Tsengs, and it said the man lived on the 87th floor of Shinra. But he actually lived out on the Sector 8 plate just north of Loveless Avenue. What else is there? Obviously you are more well-bred than any of us originally took you for. What do you really like? Rufus moved back over to the bed, his eyes no longer holding the hardness to them that they had a moment ago. I own more books than Rhapsodos. He grinned, seeing the shocked look on Rufus' face. Well, used to. None of y'all ever came into my house. Probably would have had a heart attack if you did. You. No one ever came to his apartment in Shinra because they believed his apartment would be a filthy rat hole. It was actually the complete opposite. Reno was actually a borderline OCD neat freak. I play instruments, was my escape living in the slums. You any good? Shrugging, Reno stood up and moved over to where they had left their bags and pulled out a shrunken case. Moving back over, he set it down on the bed before unshrinking it. Instantly Rufus recognized it. This was a case that Reno took with him everywhere, and Rufus was never allowed to touch it. I gave this to Tseng when Rude and Elena were killed. I knew if any one of us would survive, he would, even without the protection of the Chocobo. Even though Tseng was killed, Cloud had still kept this safe for him all these thousands of years. He had nearly broken down crying when Cloud gave it back to Tseng, who in turn had returned it to him. Lifting the case lid, he gently pulled out a beautiful deep brown red violin. It was ancient, but it still looked as good as new. Last one my dad ever made. He made it for me since I was learning. He held it out for Rufus, knowing the boy was curious. Taking it gently from Reno's hand, he held it like it was made of the most precious glass. He had always wondered what was in that case that was so special. Hearing about Reno's real childhood and seeing this, he knew why it was so special. Can you play? He was really curious now. He handed the violin back to Reno, watching as the brash, loud-mouthed Turk plucked the bow from the case and rested the violin against his shoulder. I don't know how good I will be, yo. I haven't played once since I got this body. He had spent most his childhood and teen years building up the muscle memory and calluses to play. Figuring something easy would be best till he knew where his skills were, his eyes unconsciously fell closed as he pulled the bow across the strings. Rufus watched with softening blue eyes as Reno's fingers skillfully moved across the neck of the violin. Ava Maria sang softly from the strings. He knew this piece as it was one of his mother's favorite, both mothers surprisingly. Closing his eyes, he laid down on the bed simply listening. Reno was extraordinary. There was no other way to put it. He wasn't simply playing the piece as many young musicians did. You could hear Reno's soul being put into the music. Smiling slightly, Rufus opened his eyes, looking up at Reno. Even though it was a blow to know Reno had been hiding himself from him, he was grateful that Reno had opened up to him and shown him this side. A side that only he knew about. He would keep that locked away with him forever.
I'm glad you enjoyed that video/gameplay. Just remember to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below. Until next time, goodbye!